Episode 3, One of a Kind. Things have to be getting better at this point, wouldn't you think? We had Mystery Meat stumble drunkenly through the gate only to pass out and die before crossing the finish line, followed by Parental Bonding, which just gave up and collapsed halfway down the racetrack. Certainly the third time is a charm, and One of a Kind will learn from its past errors, wouldn't you suppose? Well, apparently not. We're continuing to settle for mediocrity. Maybe I'm getting a little too cynical about this show. Ah well, let's break this nonsense down. This episode is probably going to be a little shorter than my previous two reviews, and that's simply because there just isn't a lot to talk about in this episode. We have the animal rights argument to look forward to, and Skulker's an incompetent idiot. Other than that, this episode is pretty bland and uneventful, honestly. We open with the introduction to a ghost one might initially assume is just a one-off joke. The box ghost flies through a wall and crashes into a bunch of boxes. Well, intangible. So I guess intangibility means you go through things except when you don't. Glad they've remained super consistent on that for the past 3 episodes. Danny comes after him and we get Box Ghost's signature introduction.
Beware! I am the Box Ghost!
Then Sam and Tucker kick down a metal door, and Tucker apparently sucks so much at aiming at basically point blank that Danny had to throw the Box Ghost into the Thermos's beam. So, yeah, take that as you will.
Way to go, Tucker, you suck.
Overall, this is a fairly nice scene to establish that Danny is actually turning the ghost hunting thing into a regular routine. However, as per the norm, his actions are making no logical sense whatsoever. Why is Tucker in charge of the thermos? There are so many reasons why that doesn't make any sense. I don't even know where to start. Let's start with the thermos itself and what it does. As we know, it sucks the ghosts into it and contains them. It is the most valuable and narrative-shattering device Danny has. Yes, narrative-shattering. This thing destroys any stakes the show could possibly have. Since it seems to be a popular thing to compare pieces of media to other pieces of media that have nothing to do with each other, I will now do the same in order to explain why. In the classic series of Doctor Who, the sonic screwdriver was removed from the Doctor's arsenal because the writers deemed it to be too powerful of a device for him to have. The tiny screwdriver was a stupidly powerful plot device, and if he didn't use it to get out of situations he was placed in, then it was dumb because he was clearly able to. This little piece of crap was making it too hard for the writers to create compelling and simultaneously convincing Doctor Who stories, so they did the only thing they could do and scrapped it altogether. Anybody who watches Doctor Who knows that they obviously brought the sonic screwdriver back in the new series. However, they added a little something to limit its abilities. Deadlock seals were introduced as a plot device to keep the Doctor from instantly solving every problem he encountered with the stupid thing. This restricted the sonic screwdriver's power significantly and helped the writers maintain actual stakes while still being able to use it, provided the sonic was still incredibly overpowered and it was never actually made clear on what it can or cannot do, so it ended up just being whatever the plot needed it to. But unlike other reviewers, I'd like to stay on track here. The Fenton Thermos has a similar problem, but it was handled a hell of a lot differently. And by that, I mean they just completely ignored it. This thing is so severely powerful that simply aiming it at a ghost and activating it is enough to defeat said ghost. There's no way for it to escape the beam if they're caught in it. On top of that, there's no way for them to escape the thermos unless an outside party releases them. I wasn't joking last episode when I said this thing breaks the show. There is no reason for Danny not to lead with this. He absolutely should be the one holding it because he is the most capable of getting up to the ghosts and using it on them. Sam and Tucker have zero chance of keeping up with him when he's fighting a ghost, and it's stupid to begin with because if he had the thermos, he doesn't even need to fight it. He can instantly defeat any ghost he comes across, but he just doesn't. He opts to punch them, zap them, exchange quips with them, and allow them to cause mass chaos and panic around his town and school until he uses the thermos at the end for no other reason than it's the end of the episode.
We did it, Patrick! We saved the city!
I'm going to try not to repeat myself on this point, but believe me, it's going to be difficult because this is a major thing that pops up in a lot of episodes. There are instances where it makes sense that he didn't use the thermos at first, My Brother's Keeper being the initial example that comes to mind, as he wasn't aware that Spectra was a ghost at first. Obviously, I can only say that to defend the episode up to the point where he finds out, then it's just the normal nonsense because he continues to not use it until the episode's closure. Also, a potential 10 years later version of Danny has the thermos literally installed into his gloves, so yeah. 24-year-old Danny is straight up invincible. This is a pretty big issue throughout the series. The thermos is too powerful, It needs to be nerfed. Even the smallest of things would suffice. Just something to explain why he doesn't lead with it. Even if we're going full-on Pokemon route and he needs to weaken the ghosts before he can use it, that would be a more acceptable excuse than just hoping people don't realize Danny's being an idiot. Do you have any idea how many catastrophes you could have avoided by using the thermos as soon as you saw a ghost was doing something, Danny? Random technology ghost infects all of your dad's stuff and turns into a giant robot? Wouldn't have happened. 70s pop rock chick tries to use mind control to enslave humanity? Wouldn't have happened. Motorcycle ghost guy tries to get his girlfriend to inhabit your sister's body for all eternity? Wouldn't have happened. These are the kind of things that are integral to your storytelling's quality. You never want to depend on your audience to not notice something. Let's say you're telling a story around a campfire about little Johnny, who's a writer. Now let's say that little Johnny has a magical pen that allows him to write his stories at incredible speeds, as in books as long as The Stand, written and redrafted in a couple days. You put it in because you thought it was cool, it added some flair, it was flashy. Maybe it allowed you to do something else that made your story cooler, whatever. However, oh no, little Johnny's parents are kidnapped by evil bad guy who's a fan of his work or some, I don't know. I'm honestly not putting that much thought into this example. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with it. Evil bad guy says Johnny needs to write a new story and get it to him by the end of the week if he ever wants to see his parents again, and we spend the rest of the tale with Johnny struggling to write the story in the allotted time while he forgets that the magical speed pen exists. Now say someone raises their hand in the middle of the story and asks you why he's not using it. Imagine the nerve of that guy. Clearly, this is a nitpick that doesn't matter. Danny even says that he doesn't have time for this while he calls for Tucker to hurry up and get there so they can capture him. It's incredibly unreasonable for Danny to expect Tucker to stay behind him at all times. Danny can fly and pass through solid objects. Expecting Tucker to hurry up when he is at a massive disadvantage is actually insane. If Danny had the thermos, the box ghost would have been captured by now. Honestly, I don't even know why Sam and Tucker are here. Danny makes a point that he has a test to study for, so he doesn't have time to round up ghosts all night. So why wouldn't he opt to take the thermos himself when he absolutely would be able to defeat the ghost faster that way? Sam and Tucker being here is not only a hindrance to you, but also a liability. Neither of them have the same abilities that you do that routinely allow you to escape what would otherwise maim or kill you. Ghosts are dangerous things, and having these two around just adds 2 extra bodies that you need to protect. I know they're probably not thinking about that because 14-year-old, yay, we're going on a ghost adventure kids. But my first statement stands that you would be aware that you need to do this quickly so you can actually get home and study. It makes no sense for you to be bringing these two with you. Anyway, we get some exposition to inform the audience of Sam and Tucker's role in this little barrage of idiocy, and then Tucker drops the thermos, which activates the release function on it and lets all the ghosts they've captured out. First off, good job, Tucker, you moron. Second off, there were a lot of ghosts in that thermos. I'm really curious what the capacity is, unless we're just going with the fact that it doesn't have a capacity, in which case, sure, why not? It's just that much more powerful, I suppose. Imagine if the thermos could only hold 1 ghost at a time, and that was an actual hindrance for Danny while he was fighting more than one. Not saying that would fix the thermos's problems, far from it, but that would undoubtedly be a step in the right direction. Putting restrictions and limitations on your characters and their resources is one of the best ways to create a good story. Third off, why exactly is there a release function on a device that's supposed to contain ghosts? Why wouldn't it have some kind of failsafe on it that would only allow it to activate if it were releasing the ghosts back into the zone? Oh yeah, because these two made it. I forget how their competency fluctuates depending on what the writers want to happen. Anyway, we're introduced to the main antagonist of this episode, Skulker. The introduction itself is actually incredibly well done in terms of establishing him and setting his general tone. We see him watching Danny and speaking to himself about how he's one of a kind and how he'll make a
fine addition to my collection.
Damn. Right there, we haven't even started the theme song yet, and we already have a ghost that has more depth than either the lunch lady or the dragon girl. Not much, mind you, but still more. Unironically, good job, whoever wrote that. Less than 30 seconds, and we establish that Skulker is a collector-hunter type that has enough technology and resources to capture other ghosts. Whereas before, we simply had the spirits themselves seemingly aimlessly wandering the afterlife, we now have one that seems to have taken advantage of the technology that must be available in the Ghost Zone. His design alone implies that he knows what he's doing, and he's taken that ingenuity and decided to round up other ghosts for sport. Just with that knowledge alone, there's arguably a hint more danger to be inferred from him. The lunch lady and the dragon were coincidental attacks. This one will be organized. This is quite literally the best introduction to a villain we've had so far. They were even able to fit in a quick box ghost joke. Depending on how they execute this character and his plans, this could be a fantastic episode. So, for everyone who would like to maintain their fond memories of what a cool villain Skulker was, feel free to jump ship now. Unfortunately, I have to continue. Also, I guess Danny's ghost sense just isn't alerting him to Skulker's presence. Or, the 20-some-odd ghosts that are crammed into this cage. Good thing Danny's passive powers are smart enough to only go off when it's narratively appropriate to do so. It's almost like the writers didn't realize how powerful they actually made Danny. He can possess people, so that right there, that rules out most possibilities of them being a threat. And he has a warning system built in that alerts him of the only things that can pose a threat to him. This is compounded onto the fact that he can't even do a quarter of all the crap he could do at the end of the series. Danny is very, very powerful. I want you to understand that even at the point that he's currently at, he could easily kill a lot of the higher tier superheroes from DC and Marvel. Except for here, of course, where his powers just straight up don't work for no reason, and we can get an opening monologue from our new villain. We pass the opening, and we move on to the following scene, where we see an excited Jazz jumping into the kitchen and exclaiming to her parents about how a woman's research magazine responded to her letter and offered to put Maddie on the cover. She goes on to explain how this is going to be a way for her to prove to the world that her parents aren't ghost hunting freaks. Now, this is interesting, because I had originally thought Jazz was smart. I might have to retract that statement. There's an interesting thing about your parents, Jazz, provided you've known them for 16 years, and I've only known them for a cumulative 40 minutes, so I would think that you would have picked up on this. I understand, though. I had to really look deep into the nuances of your parents' personalities to really figure this out. Everything your parents do and make have something to do with ghost hunting. They feel rather strongly about it. One might even say passionate. The fact that the interviewer who comes later in the episode seems surprised that Maddie brought up ghosts leads me to believe that the letter that Jazz sent in didn't even mention it. Which leads me to the question I wish to pose to you, Jazz. What exactly were you expecting your mom to talk about with these people? Has it not crossed your mind that the thing that your parents have dedicated their entire lives to might come up in conversation?
But it is the perfect magazine to show that I have normal parents instead of a couple of ghost hunting freaks.
That's not gonna work.
It's like, what are you honestly expecting to have happen? Like, are you just gonna say, okay, Mom, just don't talk about the thing that you enjoy doing.
That you're the genius about.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, that's how she's going to be recognized from her genius, by talking about the things that she's invented, which is all ghost hunting equipment. What are you expecting from this, Jazz?
In that respect, what the hell did you write to them and say? This magazine is presumably fairly popular, which leads me to believe they get a lot of letters, which means that Jazz's must have really stood out, unless the renewable power source that she nervously brings up during the interview is all she put down. Not to say that's not a pretty big deal, but you would also think that the Genius Magazine people would go through the necessary work to confirm that before they offered putting her on the front cover. Alright, Susan, let's go see what the Fentons work on. Never mind. Who else do we have? Also, just keep in mind, Jazz, that while you're coming in here all excited about how you think your mom isn't going to talk about ghosts to these people, she is literally working on a piece of ghost hunting equipment on the kitchen table. You're a fool, Jazz, and you're really walking into this train wreck, so I have no sympathy for you. Speaking of the ghost hunting equipment, let's go into the other reason this scene doesn't make any sense. Jack rips the device away from Natty and shows it to Danny, saying it's a device that translates ghost speak to English, which is interesting because most of the ghosts already speak English, but fine, let's go with it. He offers the device to Danny, telling him to give it a try, and Danny says boo. The device translates this to,
I am a ghost, fear me.
And at this point, I'm following. It's a little silly, but not outside what I would expect from the show. Boo means I'm a ghost, fear me. I think that's entirely fair enough. However, the stupid happens as we cut to Jack, Maddie, and Jazz staring at Danny quizzically. This prompts Danny to become more nervous, and he says,
I better get to school.
to which the device relays back,
I better get to school. Fear me.
and Jack looks down at it like it's malfunctioning. Ugh. Yeah, I see what you guys were going for, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work in the slightest. This is something I noticed as a kid, for God's sake. If the device is meant to be a translator, why would Jack be confused when it does just that when Danny uses what is commonly associated to be a ghost word? I know how to count to 10 in Spanish. If I did that into a Spanish translator and it relayed it back to me in English, would people assume that I was then Spanish? Unless this thing is only actually supposed to translate what it hears when a ghost is talking into it, in which case, why did Jack even offer it to him in the first place? Why would he tell Danny to try it out if he didn't think it was going to do anything? I get that you really want to push this oblivious parents joke, but this isn't the way to do it. This just doesn't work. Mystery Meat did this much better with the ghost tracking satellite thing, and that's a pretty low bar. The scene ends with a joke that admittingly got me a little bit. Didn't laugh out loud, mind you, but it was one of those sharp breaths through the nose and half smile type of jokes.
The world needs to know that the Fentons are a family of geniuses.
I got a D?
Danny attributes the drop in his grade to the fact that he's using his study time to fight ghosts. He goes on to say that he can't settle for a D because of the wrath of his parents, and Sam follows her writer-given prerogative of pushing the plot forward for the third time in a row. She tells Danny that he can boost his grade by doing an extracurricular report on one of the last two of a subspecies of gorilla called the purpleback. It's said that the only two left in the world are both male, and therefore the species will be extinct very soon in the coming years. Sam says this is enough to warrant Danny making an opinion piece of sorts detailing why they should be released back into the wild. Which, here's the thing about that, Sam.
Okay, so I know that we're basically going to go into the whole Canto Bite releasing the horses argument here, but Sam, what happens to an animal that has been in captivity for its entire life, and then you release it out into the wild?
It dies. No, it's complete retards, dude. That's usually the arguments of morons that don't. It's for children. They don't that's why it's the simplest garbage.
Yeah, it's the whole feel good. It's like, oh, I let the trapped animal free, and now it's living its life the way it's supposed to, I guess. Without actually taking into consideration of what happens to an animal when it's in captivity.
They just don't know.
Yeah. So that's a prevalent theme throughout this episode, though.
To have that childlike innocence back, not actually realizing the harm that you inflict upon these animals with your feel-good emotional impulses. Actually going through the process of releasing captive animals back into the wild takes a very long time. In fact, in some cases, it's just not worth it because of the animal's age and or the length of time it's spent in captivity. The best example of this was when the orca whale Keko from the Free Willy movie was released somewhere near Iceland in 1999. This was due to a writing campaign where several people wrote in demanding his freedom. The whale had been captured at a very young age and was therefore unable to ever integrate with any of the groups that they had tried to get him together with. He spent the rest of his life near the shore looking for human company before dying of pneumonia 3 years after being set loose. But yes, Sam, let's shove the gorilla into an environment it's not familiar with and leave it to fend on its own when it's been taken care of for who knows how long, possibly its entire life. It sure does feel good in the moment, doesn't it? Danny says he doesn't have time for such nonsense until Tucker informs him he's willing to pick up being his scheduler for the time being, thus giving him the time. It's a little weird that Tucker is asking to do this when we saw that he was basically already doing it at the beginning of the episode, but fine, I suppose. He mentions that he made time to go look at the gorilla, and the trio take off for it. At this point, Skulker comes in and looks at the computer they were using. He examines it and takes note about the gorilla article before a teenager walks up and asks him if he's done using the computer. This apparently throws Skulker into a panic as he fires a goo web thing that sticks the kid to the wall. So yeah, that kid fully had that coming. He ignored all the other computers that were available and walked up to the giant glowing armored thing and asked for his specifically. He couldn't have made that worse for himself if he actively tried to, so Yeah, he gets no sympathy from me.
Whoa, you do that? Nope. But I can always stop and appreciate high-quality bullying.
No one's wondering about that?
Yeah, so I guess the spider web and gag just kind of disappeared. He fell to the ground, and they're not even going to bat an eye to that, I suppose.
And
Who
now...
do they think did that?
I don't know. I don't know. And now they're literally about to fucking go check out this gorilla at night.
Yeah, I guess the zoo
What
doesn't close?
is that?
Yeah.
So we cut to the zoo where we see Sam watching the gorilla from a watchtower with Danny and Tucker. Apparently, they have access to this after hours without any adult supervision. What a lenient and trusting town to live in. Wonder what their crime rates are like. Danny and Tucker fall asleep during this time, allowing Sam to do stupid crap for the rest of the time that she's unsupervised by them. While this is going on, Skulker phases into the zoo as well and continues watching Danny. However, it just so happens that he phased into a tiger cage, which prompts said tiger to growl and start moving towards him. Skulker clearly doesn't treat this as a threat, as he defeats and traps the tiger in a hanging net before leaving the cage. Remember that. I'm not done with it yet. Wow, Skulker. You really, really suck at stealth. Why the hell did you engage the tiger at all when you're capable of just phasing through the cage and avoiding it altogether? You do realize that fighting with the zoo's assets has the potential to draw attention to you, right? Which is something that hunters typically want to avoid. And wouldn't you know it, Skulker fighting with the tiger alerts the damn gorilla that something is going on. This happens simultaneously with Sam teleporting down from the watchtower and next to the cage so it can start freaking out next to her and letting her know that something is going on. Of course, Sam takes this as Samson wanting to be set free and immediately hits the release button that I suppose is just out for public access without even the slightest thought of the consequences of these actions. So... yeah, great job, Sam. You let the dangerous wild animal out of its cage, putting its, your own, and possibly several other people's lives at risk. You have the moral compass and intellectual maturity of a 3-year-old. Not like these attributes to your character weren't made clear in the last 2 episodes, but you just somehow managed to keep one-upping yourself every time you make a decision. This is a felony, mind you. Endangering the public and potentially destruction of public property. I couldn't find much on what the proceedings were for letting an animal out of its cage, probably because it doesn't happen very often, as most zoos are fairly competent on where their door controls are, but I can adapt a little bit and say that it might be considered larceny of property worth $1,000 or more. Depending on where Sam lives and what kind of damage the gorilla dealt, Sam could be tried as an adult, as she is over the age of 13. Does this zoo have any kind of night security? Nobody checks in to make sure the animal are safe or anything like that? Considering all that needs to happen to accidentally let one out is a single button push, and a passing raccoon could do that, you'd think they'd want to check in every once in a while to make sure that everything was good. It's a good thing this zoo doesn't have any security cameras. Good thing Amity Park in general just doesn't have security cameras anywhere, especially considering the fact that the net in the tiger den would very quickly prompt the zoo management to check those cameras to see how it got there. Good thing Skulker knew that. I guess his suit told him. Kind of like how it told him that he was about to get mauled by a gorilla. Too bad it apparently doesn't have anything to protect against gorilla maulings. Let me reiterate that one. Skulker's suit has a feature that warns him about incoming gorilla attacks, yet it doesn't have one that defends against gorilla attacks. Apparently, this also inhibits him from turning intangible or invisible. This is how I'm giving Skulker the benefit of the doubt, because otherwise he's just being an idiot right now. He allows this thing to beat on him before shooting it in the eyes with his goo thing, but I honestly don't know if he even did that on purpose because it happened in conjunction with Samson biting on the arm piece. He then goes on to miss a point-blank shot with his net launcher while Samson is blinded, and gets flung around into the watchtower because said net launcher is attached to his arm for some stupid reason. What the hell are you doing, Skulker? Turn intangible and fly away. You are an incorporeal being that's being beaten up by a gorilla. This is pathetic. How do you expect to capture the kid with superpowers if you can't even handle this? Although maybe it'll be really easy for you because Danny and Tucker sleep through the giant mechanical ghost being flung into the tower, breaking the window and crashing directly next to them. They also sleep through a massive flying primate barreling into the tower and attacking Skulker once again. My god, this scene is so stupid. It takes Samson pounding on the walls to wake Danny and Tucker up. After a comedic shot of them screaming at each other, the two see Samson and Danny goes ghost to put it back. He weirdly opts to pick Samson up and fly him down to his cage, which once again showcases the fact that Danny is stronger than any of us actually acknowledge for some reason. In addition to creating this weird precedent, why don't you just possess him? Samson could have easily just torn you apart there if he wanted to, considering animals like that probably wouldn't like being picked up and flown several feet into the air. Of course he didn't, because cartoon, but my god, Danny, possessing it would have been so much easier. Why do you insist on making everything so much more difficult for yourself? And just because we're not done making Sam look utterly reprehensible, the scene ends with her blackmailing her friends into not telling anybody that she's committed a felony. So take that as you will. Also, you realize you could just possess her and take the photo, right, Danny? No? Okay. After all this, we cut back to Fenton Works, where we see the Genius Magazine interviewer speaking to Maddie. She asks what she's working on, and Jack interrupts her by trying to show her the ghost gabber. Jazz shouts at Jack to put it away before answering the question herself. There isn't really much to mention here, other than the fact that the interviewer probably wouldn't allow Jack and Jazz to sit in on the interview, since it's specifically for Maddie. She then goes on to answer the question, and surprise, surprise, she brings up that her primary focus is ghost hunting, much to the interviewer's confusion. Again, what exactly were you expecting her to say, Jazz? It's also a little bit weird that ghost hunting only just now came up in the conversation. I say this because the interviewer opens the scene by saying,
A few more questions, Maddie.
implying that she had been talking to Maddie for at least a little while prior to the "what are you doing now" question. You mean to tell me that Jack went that time without screaming something about ghosts? Also, what else is there really for them to talk about? Maddie has poured her entire life into ghost research. Her and her husband made a portal to the afterlife in their damn basement. Anything else that Maddie has made prior to that is going to pale in comparison, and she would know this. The technology they've made relating to ghosts is literally their magnum opus. How has it not come up until now? At this point, Danny, Sam, and Tucker arrive, and the three of them head upstairs to Danny's room. Danny's ghost sense goes off next to his room, and instead of doing the smart thing and going ghost before he opens the door, he decides to just do it with a scared look on his face, and what do you know? It ends poorly for him. So Sam and Tucker try and get into the room, and they can't because, I don't know, I guess Skulker locked it or something, and they have a completely useless set of lines to establish Skulker.
That's the ghost from the zoo.
Danny?
No, the other guy.
You have 24 minutes to tell this story. Not even that, 23, because you have the theme song and title card taking up a minute of screen time every episode. Every single second you are given is precious, especially with how complex some of these stories get. And you took 5 of them to do that. What did you honestly give to the audience at all? It wasn't a joke, and if it was supposed to be exposition, it told us nothing. We already knew it was the ghost from the zoo, and we already knew it wasn't Danny. We also already knew that Danny and Tucker were unaware of Skulker, and even the people who didn't pick up on it didn't need that information for the story to continue moving. If you watch this show, you'll see the pacing in just about every episode is faster than Rise of Skywalker, and events shoot by at the same kind of nauseating breakneck speed. And yes, it's because they're limited to such a short time slot, but it's also because they waste their time on things like this. I really don't see how somebody thought this was a good piece of dialogue to leave in the show. Unless they just weren't thinking at all. It contributes nothing. Actually nothing at all. And overall just chips that much more away at the already barely workable time limit they have. Unless this is just filler because they didn't reach the time limit, in which case, my god, people. You could have at least spent that time showing Skulker stalking Danny and priming his weapons. That would have at least given us more of a look at him and what he can do. Instead, you opt to show him in action for the first time, being juggled and nearly demolished by a gorilla. Also, since there's noise happening, the writers know they have to address Danny's parents downstairs. However, they want to fit in one more joke first, and they have to show that Sam and Tucker are looking worried before running down to cover for Danny. What they decided to do for this, while not exactly terrible, was a little bumpy in execution. We hear Jazz calling upstairs,
Hello, what's going on up there?
And we see the shot of Tucker and Sam looking concerned before running down to tackle the issue. We then cut back to the interview where we see that Jazz is now saying to the interviewer that ghost hunting isn't the main focus. Even though Maddie just said that it was, and neither the interviewer nor her parents say anything about this blatant contradiction, before another crash happens that causes Jack to start panicking.
Ghost! 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 Ghost!
It's really, really weird that it took the second crash for Jack to decide that there was a ghost happening. Also, I think that there's an argument to be had about the abruptness in transitioning between Jazz's calling up to Danny and talking to the interviewer again. It would have been a lot smoother to have simply cut from the first crash to downstairs, showing Jack freaking out then, and then showing Sam and Tucker hearing that and running off to try and keep it under control. Overall, it's not that bad, but I just think they could have smoothed out a few of the edges on this one.
Come, Ghost Boy. Time to see your new home.
Is nobody hearing that? They're in the other room!
See your new home.
Danny and Skulker's fight moves to the lab, and thankfully, Jack, Maddie, Jazz, and the interviewer are all idiots who decide they're going to go upstairs after hearing crashing and banging in the basement. Now let's move on to the stupidest part of the episode. Skulker prepares to take Danny into the ghost zone to put him on display, when Sam runs in front of him and begins highlighting her agenda to him.
Did you hear me? I said I'm vegan.
We hear about how Samson should be let out, and instead of just swatting her away and continuing forward, he stops and listens, allowing Danny to kick him away. He lands next to Tucker, who runs away, dropping his PDA behind him. And instead of focusing his attention on the prize that just got away from him, Skulker instead looks down at the PDA and decides he likes it. He compares it to his own technology, which conveniently sucks now, and decides he's going to... Okay, we need to pause for a second because I'm about to open a gigantic can of worms and I have other things I need to address first. Skulker has already shown to not give the slightest of a crap about Tucker or Sam. Up to this point, he has either ignored them or restrained or blocked them from helping Danny. They are irrelevant to his hunt. His focus is on the Ghost Boy. However, now that Danny needs to be saved, I mean, not really because he just kicks him away anyway, Sam is able to just block him, the giant, hulking, mechanical ghost that could literally just walk through her, and begins going on about her PETA levels of insanity.
He's a beautiful animal and deserves to roam free.
I
Should be ashamed.
Just put me in the ghost zone, Skulker. Get me out of here.
Not only this, but after Danny kicks him off and sends him flying into Tucker, Skulker decides he's not going to retaliate or go after him again before he gets away. He decides he's going to look over at Tucker and see what he's up to. Now, Tucker decides that this PDA is more advanced than his own suit. The very same suit that's able to identify when a gorilla is going to try and murder him. And so for that, he decides to do this idiocy. Alright, let's draw straws on where I'm going to start with this train wreck. I love how this is the point where we find out that Skulker's technology isn't good enough for him. The point where he has the opportunity to do something about it. We had no reason to believe that his exosuit was antiquated, and in fact, entirely the opposite was the case. He has a net launcher, a feature that warns of incoming attacks and can even identify what the attacker is. Whatever it was he was using to show off his cage of the ghosts, be it a holographic unit or an actual storage piece, a goose shot, web, whatever the hell this thing is. His suit is more advanced than a PDA from 2004. Why don't you go upstairs and take Danny's Zune while you're at it, Skulker? Had we actually had a scene where we saw Skulker's suit was inefficient or wasn't getting him his prey, then this scene would have been a little bit more forgivable. Not by much, but a little bit more. And before anyone says, the scene with Samson was not a display of the inefficiency of his suit. It was him being an idiot. You know why? Because he beat the tiger with minimal effort. Have you ever actually seen a tiger? They're huge. They're the largest cats in the animal kingdom. Now consider the fact that leopards have been known to hunt gorillas, and leopards are a hell of a lot smaller than tigers. To give a comparison here, a leopard has a bite force of 300 psi, which is actually lower than a domesticated mastiff. A tiger's bite force is 1,050, whereas a gorilla's jaw is technically stronger, sitting at 1,300 psi. The tiger should have absolutely been equal in threat to Samson. More so, even, because tigers are more aggressive animals by default. Yet we see that Skulker's suit has no problem whatsoever incapacitating the tiger, but it does Samson. Because plot. Now, I'd like to tackle the whole PDA from 2004 part. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that this thing is actually more advanced than Skulker's suit. We know that it isn't, and that the scene is just telling us that it is, but let's just go with it for a minute. What in the absolute hell makes Skulker think that stuffing it into his wrist piece is going to do anything? This would be like me shoving my phone into a Windows XP CD drive and expecting it to turn into a Windows 10. The only way he would figure this would be a thing would be if his suit had a feature that could adapt to different technologies and could be compatible with them. In which case, if it's advanced enough to do that, why do you need to upgrade it? Why do you think this thing is going to upgrade it? Do you even know what it is? Oh, look, it works. It just works. It's a piece of technology that is fully compatible with another piece of technology from an alternate dimension, both of which are meant to do completely different things. Look at that, a laser gun they didn't have before it came out of the... This makes any sense. Also, I guess the PDA just gave him a jetpack because that's how technology works. How redundant is it for a ghost to have a jetpack? Okay, so Skulker goes in to finish Danny off when Tucker's PDA begins beeping, prompting the ghost to look down at it. It comes up with the scheduled event to fly to the library and get a book on purpleback gorillas. This causes Skulker's jetpack to jump out and send him flying away. This means that Skulker's suit is able to recognize and execute commands from the PDA, even though they're only written pieces with no code behind it. Aside from the fact that Skulker can't just override it for no reason whatsoever, it's not hard, Skulker. It's called the Edit Schedule button. If your suit can understand all of that, why do you need to upgrade... Also, as we see for the rest of the episode, Skulker's restraints are deactivated by his proximity to them, which is a horrid flaw in his system. God, Skulker, you really suck as a hunter. Like, really, really bad.
Brooding, messy, reclusive. Now those are the signs of a true genius. Oh, if only he were a woman.
Hold on! That's sexist. If only he was a woman. F you. Also, those qualities don't mean anything to anybody. Those don't mean anything. I'm pretty sure genius is measured by the accomplishments and things you know how to do and make and all that, not, oh, wow, you sit in your room all day and you're kind of messy. Because in that respect, I'm a genius because I do that, and I'm not because I just, God damn it.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Retarded.
Yeah.
The next few scenes detail Skulker repeatedly trying to attack Danny, yet failing to do so because the PDA interrupts him. It forces him to abide by the schedule that Tucker had previously inputted into the thing, except for here, when Tucker's backup PDA tells him to go to class, yet Skulker isn't being forced to go to class for some reason. So tell me, Skulker, why haven't you just taken the PDA out if it's just screwing you over every time you get close to capturing him? Seems like a bit of a hindrance rather than an upgrade for you, so it might be crossing over into not worth it territory. Just gonna keep it on, though, I see. Also, Danny, Sam, and Tucker don't actually make the connection that Skulker's tied to the schedule until the third time it happens, so, they're all idiots. What a surprise.
Well, at least he's regular.
Yeah, almost like a schedule. What's...
Are you seriously only picking up on this now, Danny?
We get this overly long explanation on what's going on, even though it couldn't have been shoved down our throats harder, as Danny explains that Skulker has to do whatever the schedule tells him to. Again, you only have 20 minutes to do this crap. Why are you wasting it on detailing something that everyone already knows? I have very low expectations for a child's intelligence as it is, but if someone actually watches this and doesn't understand what's going on, maybe they just need to enjoy the jangly key bits and never think too hard about anything. It's one thing for the flashback scene in Joker that everyone complains about, but Joker is also a 2-hour movie, and that scene lasts a whole 5 seconds. This is a 20-minute show that devoted nearly 20 seconds to telling us that Skulker has to do things that we've already been seeing that he has to do. Joker could have survived without the flashback scene. It doesn't really matter either way. One of a Kind is actively damaged by its narrative equivalent.
Do we seriously need to have this dialogue to explain to the audience this?
So I guess, we're just all stupid.
So,
Children are stupid.
Does the show really have that little faith in its demographics' intellect? Like, seriously?
I guess so.
God.
Imagine if they would have used that time to make Skulker more threatening or formidable. For that matter, imagine if they would have made Skulker threatening or formidable. Anyway, Danny uses this knowledge to devise a plan. It's a very strange plan. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm still fairly unclear on what it actually was. We cut back to the unsecured zoo, where we see Skulker waiting in a tree for Danny to arrive while watching Samson.
Like, he has this incredible technology, this exosuit that he's just inside of, and yet he can't reprogram the equivalent of a Samsung.
Also, how are they in there? What the fuck is a zoo?
Yeah, this zoo that only has a gorilla display and a tiger display.
Yeah.
And apparently is only accessible at night. Also, Danny and Sam and Tucker are the ones underneath that little gorilla suit thing. So, I'd like to point out that Sam and Tucker have just been kind of sitting there like that for the past hour and a half, possibly longer, waiting for Skulker to actually do something.
Yep.
So, you mean to tell me that you two idiots have been sitting there pretending to be a gorilla for over an hour? Why? Where's Samson right now, then? Why would you do this rather than just lure Skulker out and just getting this over with? It's not like there's much of a plan because Danny just starts beating on him as soon as he notices them. All of that was useless, and it served nothing but to create questions. So you just stood there and did nothing for an hour, huh? That must have been fun. Guess neither of you thought of an easier way to do this in all that amount of time then, huh? This can't even be passed off as prep time because Tucker is now shown to have full control over Skulker's suit through his backup PDA. He could have shut Skulker down as soon as they knew he was there, but they just didn't. Afterwards, it's explained off as a joke because Tucker just wanted to screw with him, but before that, why didn't Tucker just shut him down immediately? Why did they want to wait for an hour, waiting for Skulker to decide to do something? Do you seriously have nothing better to do with your evening than pretend to be a gorilla? What are you doing? Anyway, the fight goes on, and when it starts looking bleak, Danny starts making hand signals to call for Samson to help. This works because why not? And once again, Skulker is completely incapable of beating this wild animal, despite having previously beaten the tiger, having the ability to turn intangible and invisible, and supposedly having his armor upgraded through the PDA. Also, where exactly has Samson been this whole time? How nice that they were able to get it to fully cooperate with their nonsensical plan. Sure would have been awkward if it just walked past Sam and Tucker while they were pretending to be him. We find out that Skulker needs the exosuit because he looks like this, which is interesting. Seems like that's something they could explore a little bit. Maybe have an episode where we see him without the suit and we see how he would adapt to it. Shame nothing like that ever happened, but I suppose that'd be too cool.
Skulker is also acting different now that he's not in his suit. He's acting more goofy and like, and now that he's not in his exosuit.
Yep.
We conclude this idiocy with Danny finding out that Samson is actually female. So, great. Thanks a lot, Danny. Now I have to go over why none of this makes any sense.
Nobody at that zoo ever bothered to see if it was a boy or a girl?
That's weird, huh? Well, maybe they were respecting her privacy.
That's not how that works, Danny.
It literally isn't. None of this would happen this way.
That doesn't even have anything to do with it. Like, aren't female gorillas smaller than males? Wouldn't they automatically?
I'm sure they're very different.
Oh, I'm going to look that up right now. Let's see. Differences between male and female gorillas.
It's already shown that they're sexually dimorphic, so there's differences right there.
Yep.
It's already said in the definition of that.
Oh my god. The females are so much smaller than the males. What the hell?
Gorillas are sexually dimorphic, you onion. The females are smaller than the males, and there's this magical thing called the zoo would check the gender of their animals and not just guess. Somebody is 100% getting fired from this place, for more than one reason, I imagine. Anyway, all this trouble and Danny only gets his grade raised to a C. Absolutely unfair. Danny clearly showed a level of dedication and perseverance to visit this gorilla exhibit and made a discovery that has a potential to save the species. 100% Danny deserves an A, but Lancer's not a character yet, so we don't have to make sense of his motivations, I guess. I guess Sam just dropped the whole let Samson loose argument too, by the way. End of the episode, so she can stop being a lunatic, I suppose. The episode ends with Danny being an asshole to poor Box Ghost because he's mad about his grade, and Oh boy, thank God we're finished. This was honestly the first episode I was really not looking forward to reviewing. Not necessarily because it's the worst of the three, but more that it's just the most... There's nothing really much to talk about in this episode, other than the stupid PDA crap, but that's just... I mean, the show just kind of seemed to take a downgrade from the fairly realistic children's cartoon that it started out as into the nonsensical children's cartoon where things happen because it's funny. This is something that happens fairly often throughout the show, where we switch between mildly grounded and realistically portrayed to goofy and silly, coming from the same vein as Fairly Odd Parents rather than something of its own. This will certainly not be the first time I'll be addressing nonsensical elements coming into the show in the effort of pushing Fairly Odd Parents style humor. The thing is you need to pick one side, man. You can't start off as a somewhat grounded action cartoon and turn into not grounded in the slightest. Tonal inconsistency is what kills stories, and you spend 2 episodes establishing that this will be an action show first and comedy second. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't have an episode that's more comedic, but you have to make sure that it fits in with a style that's already been established. You take a look at the Fairly Odd Parents and you see that the world itself is a goofy and nonsensical one, even without the fairies. It's the style that the show subscribes to from the start, and it maintains that style. If you take the ghosts out of Danny Phantom, you essentially have the same world we live in. So when you show weird crap like the PDA upgrading the ghost technology, or the gorilla fully cooperating with Danny and his plans, or the zoo not actually being aware of the gender of their own damn gorilla, I have to raise an eyebrow. If it weren't for the fact that we introduced Skulker this episode, I would almost say this was a filler episode. It's useless and could be entirely removed, and you wouldn't miss anything other than that introduction. In terms of the subplot, all we really got for the conclusion for that was Danny got onto the magazine because... I don't know, because he found out the gorilla was female, I guess. I guess we just don't get to see Jazz's reaction to this, even though she was the one who actually cared about this thing. It's just... There's nothing to say. There's nothing really to say about this episode. It's kind of lame. And a lot of the stuff in it just didn't make any sense. So, yeah. I'd like to say that there's more things to deep dive into, but I really don't know what to do on that. I'm not working with much. So, yeah. That concludes episode 3. See you next week. Next week's episode is a little better, sort of. So we have that to look forward to at least.
Yeah, he didn't wake up to crash at the window.
For the ghost child.
And a gorilla attacking.